Hi everyone, and welcome to Module 13. This video lecture will be about what I'm terming alternative and adjunctive approaches, including mindfulness, art therapy, music therapy, yoga, and other body work, and spirituality. So many practitioners use some form of mindfulness-based meditation or breathing techniques that it may in fact be hard to separate out the effects of mindfulness and properly study it. Therapists have really latched onto mindfulness techniques as effective ways of de-escalating affect and promoting affect regulation. Jon Kabat-Zinn at University of Massachusetts Medical Center developed the widely used mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which typically involves an 8-week group format with additional homework assignments. An adaptation of MBSR is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy adapted by Siegel and colleagues. It teaches many of the same MBSR concepts, but includes longer sessions designed to focus more fully on participants' thought processes. Some basic considerations for working with clients in terms of mindfulness are offered by John Briere and Catherine Scott in their 2015 book, Principles of Trauma Therapy, which is actually another book that I considered for this course in terms of a textbook. First, it's important to screen for appropriateness of using mindfulness with a given client. Those who are really struggling with intrusive flashbacks, or who experience excessive rumination consistent with depression, or who are easily triggered, may be more likely to experience distress or destabilization when meditating. It does not necessarily mean the technique cannot be used with such clients, but that care should be taken to be sure that they are stable first. Secondly, it's important that the therapist have some training in MBSR or MBCT in order to anticipate what some of the issues and concerns are and to deal with them effectively when they arise. Third, as the client gains skills in meditation and mindfulness, these capacities can be called on during trauma-focused psychotherapy. This is particularly true for what are called the settling skills for decreasing anxiety and hyperarousal. Also, it's important to note that in a relatively relaxed state, a person can uncover emotionally laden memories, and this should be anticipated. The relaxed state may promote the processing of the trauma in a positive way. Also, as the client gains skills in this area, they can engage in what is termed metacognition, which means being able to consider their trauma-related cognitions, feelings, and memories as just products of the mind that are not real in the current context. Gaining skill in mindfulness can also lead to overall reduced anxiety, reduced reactivity, and increases in affect regulation capacity. Finally, Briere and Scott suggest that in the context of ongoing treatment, the therapist can encourage existential insight. This means that with mindfulness, there is the possibility to potentially change the client's perspective on situations and events that otherwise might produce greater distress. Overall, these techniques have much utility with clients. Oops, sorry. In terms of looking at specific research on mindfulness, we read an article about a pilot study of mindfulness for survivors conducted by Kimbrough and colleagues at University of Maryland and reported in 2010. They specifically want to know whether teaching clients Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness meditation-based stress reduction, or MBSR, techniques reduce symptoms of depression and PTSD and anxiety in clients who were survivors of childhood sexual abuse. They hypothesized that participation in MBSR would be associated with improvements in depressive symptoms at 8 weeks, which was their study's primary outcome of interest. They also hypothesized that participation would be associated with improvements in what they considered their secondary outcomes of reducing PTSD and anxiety symptoms, and they also expected to see improved scores on a measure of mindfulness practice. 27 adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse participated in this pilot study. It was comprised of an 8-week through follow-up, 8-week, course of classes through final follow-up at 24 weeks. Got garbled that. It was comprised of an 8-week MBSR program and daily home practice of mindfulness skills. The interveners also provided 3 refresher classes through final follow-up at 24 weeks. They conducted assessments of depressive symptoms, PTSD, anxiety, and mindfulness at baseline, 4, 8, and 24 weeks. At 8 weeks, they found that the depressive symptoms in their study participants were reduced by 65%. Statistically significant improvements were observed in all of the outcomes post-MBSR with effect sizes above 1.0. Improvements were largely sustained until 24 weeks. Of the 3 PTSD symptom criteria, symptoms of avoidance and numbing were most greatly reduced. Compliance to class attendance and home practice was high, with the intervention proving safe and acceptable to participants. So the formal meditation practices that were introduced were in 4 formats. The first was a sitting meditation, using aspects of the present moment as anchors of attention, such as breath, sound, body sensations, or opening awareness, as well as a guided meditation to cultivate compassionate well wishes for self and others. They also used a progressive body awareness meditation, which is like a body scan. They also used contemplative walking, or a walking meditation, and they also employed gentle yoga stretching exercises. In addition, participants were asked to carry out certain activities of daily life in a mindful fashion each week, including mindful communication and mindful eating. These were called informal practices. The class was taught by a highly experienced teacher who was trained in both MBST and, interestingly, in dialectical behavioral therapy. It is important to note that being in concurrent talk therapy was actually an inclusion criteria for this study, and that of the 27 participants who completed the pilot study, 10, or 37%, were taking antidepressant medication, 2 were taking anti-anxiety medication, which was 7%, and 6, or 22% of the sample, were taking both antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. This is one of the reasons that we cannot, at this point yet, call MBST a frontline treatment, in that we cannot yet separate out whether it was the MBSR intervention or the psychotherapy or the medications or the combination thereof that was responsible for the changes observed. We also cannot tease out specifically which of the techniques might have been most helpful based on this particular study. Was it the meditation or the progressive body scans or the walking or the yoga? The authors do point out, however, that despite already being in ongoing psychotherapy, in many cases for decades, high levels of depression and PTSD symptoms were observed at baseline in this sample. This suggests that MBSR applied as an adjunct to psychotherapy may be a very useful strategy, and that much more research should be directed to augmenting these findings. The American Art Therapy Association defines art therapy as a mental health profession in which clients, facilitated by the art therapist, use art media, the creative process, and the resulting artwork to explore their feelings, reconcile emotional conflicts, foster self-awareness, manage behavior and addictions, develop social skills, improve reality orientation, reduce anxiety, and increase self-esteem. The AATA website has great resources for exploring art therapy, including a new page on the value of art therapy in trauma-informed work, which I have provided you a link to here. In the article we read called Finding a Voice, authors Amy Bakos and Barb Pagan share their experiences as therapists working with adolescent girls in a group therapy setting. Their intention with this paper was twofold. They wanted to describe their group and offer insights into working with this population, and they also hoped to increase awareness of the subtle ways in which culture can support violence against women. They argue that rape and incest and incest are a collective problem resulting from years of inequity reinforced by socially acceptable myths that are perpetuated in our popular culture and in our criminal justice system, in our medical institutions, churches, and other societal institutions. And that the climate overall promotes a rape culture that subtly and not so subtly suggests that violence against women and children is acceptable. They also believe, as do many, that sexual abuse intrudes on the developmental process, shattering the adolescent's sense of safety and control over her world. They suggest that the remnants of imposed violence intrude ominously on the teen's ability to gain and maintain emotional equilibrium. They point to work by Steele in the 80s that suggests that young people who have been abused usually have some difficulty in developing an integrated, cohesive identity, and encourage us to see self-destructive and or out-of-control behaviors in adolescence as their struggles to cope with the normal changes of this age. Helping an adolescent sort through and examine these feelings and subsequent responses can be difficult because dealing with the painful issues can be overwhelming for a young survivor, or anyone. They suggest that adolescents can be resistant to therapy as a result, especially if the therapy moves too quickly or touches painful memories too soon. They recommend that an effective tool for such exploration is group art therapy, which they feel allows for exploration into the issues surrounding sexual assault in a nonverbal way that is typically less threatening than traditional therapy. Further, they suggest that art maneuvers around the normal teenage resistance to therapy and adults in general. Adolescent survivors must often relearn how to trust others. The authors suggest that the commonality of the group can help the adolescent feel she is not alone in a way that one-on-one talking therapy cannot. Further, they feel that introducing an art component to the adolescent survivor group adds a creative dimension that seems to decrease adolescent anxiety through action-based tasks, allowing them to project their distress or negative energy onto the artwork, which provides an outlet for inner tension. Although the authors did not do a study of their methods per se, it is true that many therapists use some sort of art therapy with their clients, particularly with children and adolescents. I myself have used art therapy in an individual context in therapy with children with amazing effect. I was using it primarily in conjunction with trauma-focused CBT, where children wrote a book describing their trauma journey and illustrated it with images, which not only allowed them to externalize their pain, but also transform it through creatively imagining a positive future. Using art in the therapy room, whether it be in an individual or group setting, is another powerful adjunctive tool. The American Music Therapy Association describes music therapy as the clinical and evidence-based use of music interventions to accomplish individualized goals within a therapeutic relationship by a credentialed professional who has completed an approved music therapy program. Their website has a lot of resources for those of you who may be interested. And I've included a link to a page they have on their website on music therapy in response to crisis and trauma. Our reading by Dorit Amir describes a case study of a client who uses music therapy and improvisation to expose, deal with, and heal from sexual trauma. She divides this therapeutic process into 4 developmental stages. The first she calls the beginning stage, or the musical facade, which is a period where the client plays by themselves and expresses emotions encoded in previously learned music pieces without specific reference to past trauma. During this beginning stage, the therapist encourages the client to move towards improvisation rather than set music pieces, which marks the start of the journey into the inner world with the support of the therapist. Diving into the unconscious and exposing the trauma is the next stage that the author follows. And this describes a period where the client is focusing more fully on improvisation, which allows for deeply hidden emotions to emerge. The next stage, processing the trauma, is one in which the survivor explicitly works with the traumatic material and expresses the attendant emotions through a narrative recounting through music. The last stage, that of integration, growth, and renewal, is one in which the client starts to really digest the trauma and her story and starts to step into her power and really work on changing things that have been problematic for her in her life as a result of the trauma, which in the case example centered around problems with intimate relationships. I think that the stages described in detail through the use of the case study really mirror nicely the stages that we've explored in other approaches. Although little has been done in the way of research into the relative effectiveness of music therapy for survivors, it seems to me that particularly for those clients who are interested in and like to express themselves through music, that working in this modality could be quite therapeutic. Researcher Cynthia Price has done a lot of work looking at the effects of massage on specific vulnerable populations. In the 2005 article we read, she conducted a small study where she randomized 24 women survivors of child sexual abuse to 8 one-hour-long sessions of either massage therapy or a body-oriented therapy protocol, which included massage, body awareness exercises, and inner body focusing process. Participants were in psychotherapy as well. The main outcome measures were reflected in 3 constructs: psychological well-being, physical well-being, and body connection. The repeated measures that she used included brief symptom inventory, dissociative experiences scale, crime-related post-traumatic stress disorder scale, the medical symptoms checklist, and a scale of body connection and a scale of body investment. She did repeated measures analysis of variance, or ANOVA, and this indicated significant improvement on all the outcome measures for both intervention groups, providing some support for the efficacy of body therapy in recovery from childhood sexual abuse. There were no statistically significant differences between the groups. However, qualitative analysis of open-ended questions about participant intervention revealed that the groups differed on their perceived experience of the intervention and its influence on therapeutic recovery. Dr. Price acknowledges that the concurrent psychotherapy likely contributed to the improved and maintained health outcomes. However, her qualitative findings and process evaluations provided insight into the massage and body-oriented therapy contribution to health outcomes and represents another form of adjunctive therapy which definitely warrants further study. In the article we read by Bessel van der Kolk and colleagues, reported in 2014, trauma-focused yoga was used to help women survivors with chronic treatment-resistant PTSD. Women were randomly assigned to weekly one-hour sessions of either trauma-informed yoga, which included breathing, posture, and meditation elements, or supportive women's health education classes, which included information on increasing self-efficacy to seek medical services, discuss health issues with medical professionals, normalize talking about issues of the body and medical terminology, and also to conduct and use self-care activities. Of the 64 women in this study, there were improvements in PTSD scores and also depression scores for both the yoga and the health class groups. However, there was a higher degree of improvement in the yoga group, and the improvements were sustained for a longer period of time. The authors note that the effect sizes for the improvements were similar to those reported for other well-researched psychotherapeutic approaches and for psychopharmacology. The authors suggest that a reason that yoga might be so effective is the embodied piece. They cite work by others characterizing the effects of changing breathing patterns on autonomic systems, including heart rate variability and cardiac vagal tone, and the effects of mindfulness meditation on chronic pain, immune system function, cortisol levels, etc. They suggest that for those with chronic PTSD, getting at the embodied pieces of trauma is key. This is also a main theme in the sensory motor approaches we explored in a previous module. Although this research is still in its infancy, I think the trend will be toward incorporating more body-inclusive approaches for working with survivors in the future. If you'd like to read more about this overall concept, a good book is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, who really has been outspoken on this issue. Other books specifically about yoga and trauma are also available by David Emerson and also by he and his co-author Elizabeth Hopper. It is important, finally, to address spirituality and its role in trauma recovery. This is a complicated thing because the term means different things to different people. There's a great discussion of the role of spirituality as it relates to trauma on the VA's National Center for PTSD website, which is just a great resource all the way around. They encourage us to think of it in 3 dimensions: that of beliefs, spiritual practices, and spiritual experiences. All of these dimensions may enter into your work with trauma survivors, especially when you consider that a 2007 Gallup poll shows that 86% of respondents express a belief in God. It is suggested that spirituality may improve post-trauma outcomes through reduction of behavioral risks, through healthy religious lifestyles, for example, less drinking or smoking, expanded social support through involvement in spiritual communities, enhancement of coping skills and helpful ways of understanding trauma that result in meaning-making, and physiological mechanisms such as the activation of the relaxation response through prayer or meditation. Feelings of isolation, loneliness, and depression related to grief and loss may be lessened by the social support of a spiritual community. While it's not our place to suggest specific spiritual practices for our clients, it is important to understand your client's spiritual orientation in order to promote participation and inclusion in those spiritual communities. This, of course, can be complicated when the trauma originated in the spiritual community, as with clergy abuse. But overall, understanding the client's participation in their spiritual journey through life and promoting the positive aspects of that can be a powerful adjunct to your work with survivor clients. So today we've touched on a few of the many adjunctive therapies available for you to put in your toolkit for working with survivors. I encourage you to explore the emerging evidence base for these therapies and approaches, and consider seeking training in one or more of these areas in order to enhance your future practice. That's all for now. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.